Good morning, everyone. My name is Anastasia Vashekova. I work at the conference unit at the Institute of International Relations Prague, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar on the topic of gender-based violence in academic settings. On behalf of the IAR and the World Trade Institute, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. And before we begin, I invite you to follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter if you want to stay updated on our future events. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Marcela Linkova. And I will give the floor to Dr. Federica Cristani, the organizer of today's webinar, our senior researcher and the head of Center for International Law. And she will further introduce the event and the speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. Thank you so much to the conference service here for making also this event possible today. And good morning or good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm really delighted to welcome all of you today at our first webinar of our Gender Lecture Series 2025 on the building blocks of gender studies, practical pathway to equalities. And I'm very happy to introduce this new gender lecture series, which I've had the honor to co-organize with my great colleague in Bern, Professor Elisa Fornale from the World Trade Institute of the University of Bern, in the framework of the Horizon Europe HR Just project and the WTI Know the Gap program, led by Professor Fornale at the World Trade Institute. This lecture builds already on a previous gender lecture series that was organized in the previous years and also last year, the very last one on the building blocks of gender studies, always organized by Professor Fornale. And this time we are focusing on the practical implication of gender studies in some of the key areas of work. And today we are delighted to host Professor Marcela Linkova for this webinar on gender-based violence in academic settings, policy evolution, and work ahead. Marcela is the head of the Center for Gender and Science and the Institute of Sociology at the Czech Academy of Science here in Prague. Her research focuses on the sociology of gendered organizations and institutional change, gender-based violence in academia, governance of research, and the public policy for gender equality in research and innovation. Marcela is also the member state co-chair of ERA Forum subgroup on inclusive gender equality and coordinates the Horizon Europe project Gender Action Plus. And between 2017-2021, she was also the chair of ERAC, Standing Working Group of Gender in the Research and Innovation, and the coordinator of Horizon 2020 Gender Action Project. And she's also involved in the GenderSAFE project and previously participated in other multiple Horizon 2020 projects, including UniSAFE, GenderSmart, Casper, and J-Academy. And her work has appeared in many high-impact journals, the European Journal of Women's Studies, Gender Research, Science Public Policy, among others. And she is the alumna of the 2017 IVLP Women in STEM. And today she's going to present and discuss the important issue of gender-based violence and how it has been gained attention also at the European level. And she will also present the result of her projects, Horizon 2020 UniSAFE, GenderSAFE projects, and a discussion how to address gender-based violence. Just before we start, some practical issues for today's webinar. So I will hand over to Marcela, and she will present for about 30-40 minutes, and then we will have time for discussion. And you're very welcome to use the chat box here in Zoom for any questions, comments during or after the presentation. And I will hand.
Federica, sorry, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Okay. And so we are recording also this webinar, and you will then find all the recordings in the HR Just Intersect Observatory website. So without further ado, I will hand over to Marcela. Thanks a lot again for being with us today, and I'm very much looking forward to the presentation and the discussion. Thank you. Please, Marcela.
Thank you very much, Federica. Good morning, everyone. It's really a huge pleasure to join you today for the webinar, and thanks for the extensive introduction. So as Federica was saying, I will be speaking specifically about recent research into gender-based violence in research and higher education conducted within the UniSAFE project, and then some of the policy developments that we are seeing, the continued challenges to addressing gender-based violence in academic settings, and some of the tools that are being developed. So with this, I will start sharing my PowerPoint presentation. You should now see it in presentation mode, and I will start. So when we speak about gender-based violence in higher education and research at the policy level, it was not until 2018 that this issue started to garner any attention at the EU policymaking within the European research area. And so at that time, in the Standing Working Group on Gender and Research and Innovation, we included this topic in our work program and conducted the first policy analysis and recommendations, which we delivered to member states, to the Council and the Commission. This was followed in 2021 by the adoption of Ljubljana Declaration on Gender Equality in Research and Innovation, which was adopted and proposed by the Slovenian presidency of the Council. And here, gender-based violence features among 6 priority areas. And it put forward issues that needed to be addressed, including collection of data and other aspects. So as I'm saying, this was really not until 2018, which is quite striking given the fact that research into gender-based violence in higher education dates back to 1970s. We know it's a huge problem, but at the policy level, this really did not percolate. When we look at more recent years, following the adoption of the Ljubljana Declaration, member states and the Commission adopted so-called ERA policy agenda, so policy agenda for implementing the European research area, with ERA Action 5, which focused on gender equality and gender mainstreaming. And one outcome deliverable of this is the Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct, which was delivered by the ERA Forum subgroup on inclusive gender equality in September last year. And I will introduce this code of conduct a little later to tell you what is in it and how we're working with zero tolerance as a concept. For the current policy period 25-27, this work will continue within Structural Policy 3. The ERA policy agenda was just adopted by the Commission and is pending approval by member states. And so the outcome there is to implement the code of conduct, continue increasing commitment, raising awareness about the issue, and intensify implementation of measures at the level of research performing organizations, as well as member states and research funding organizations, so grant agencies. We also have the issue integrated in Council recommendation on the European framework to attract and retain research, innovation, and entrepreneurial talents in Europe, which was adopted in December 23. And this is the document that underlies the new European Charter for Researchers, which is annexed to the Council. So this is the HRS4R or HR award that institutions across Europe are adopting. And so importantly now, gender-based violence will be also one element that needs to be addressed in the applications for HR award. But of course, despite these really important policy developments, we continue to face challenges. There's a lack of understanding, knowledge, and awareness of the issue at all levels, including the terminology that we use. There's, of course, resistance to addressing the issue at institutional level. We continue to lack data in a national contexts. We do not always see institutional commitment to addressing this. There's inconsistent implementation and enforcement. So this leads to significant implementation gaps between policy adoption and practice. We are now, of course, in importantly shifting political climate. So the issue as such is facing challenges that we perhaps did not anticipate a few years back. The issue gets deprioritized, and there's a lack of structural support. So a lot to work on in the coming months and years. So I will now turn to definitions so that we know what we talk about when we talk about gender-based violence. It's important to remind ourselves that when we talk about gender, we don't mean women or women and men, but all forms of gender identities, including queer, intersex, transgender, non-binary, as well as the gender structures and gender processes more broadly that underwrite our social realities. Gender-based violence then refers to any type of harm that is perpetrated against a person or a group of people because of their factual or perceived sex, gender, sexual orientation, or gender identity. It can be perpetrated by anyone, including intimate partners, family members, colleagues at work, schoolmates, friends, of course, unknown people, but also people who act on behalf of cultural or religious state and intrastate institutions. And it can take many forms, from sexual, physical, verbal, psychological, socioeconomic, as well as others, to hate speech on the internet, rape, and murder. In academic settings, in UniSAFE and GenderSAFE, we built on these definitions. And so the term gender-based violence is used to capture all forms of gender-based violence: physical, sexual violence, psychological violence, economic violence, sexual harassment on the grounds of gender, and environmental harassment, both online and in offline contexts. So what are the root causes of gender-based violence? What causes gender-based violence in academic contexts? Of course, we have wide-ranging evidence that discrimination continues. Gender-based discrimination and other forms of intersectional discrimination exist in higher education and research, and there are biased practices. We continue to see gender stereotypes and harmful gender and cultural norms. Of course, the academic settings are ripe with power inequalities and power dynamics that are inscribed in how academia is organized along the entire academic career ladder, and also the power disparities between students and teaching staff. And then there are the broader systemic issues of patriarchal power and toxic masculinity. And so typically what we address, or what institutions tend to address, are the most serious forms of what we usually imagine under the term violence. But we are using the term gender-based violence to also apply to, let's say, the softer forms, including depreciation, comments on appearance, sexist language and jokes, microaggressions, etc. And I will get to this later in the talk. We will also see, when I go over the statistics that UniSAFE yielded, that intersectionality is really an important aspect that we need to keep in mind when addressing gender-based violence. We know that gender-based violence disproportionately impacts individuals who hold multiple identities, including disability, race and ethnicity, but also other aspects. So with this, I will now go to the presentation of the UniSAFE findings, which will tell us something about the scope and magnitude of the experience of gender-based violence that we see in Europe. By way of introduction, let me say that UniSAFE survey was the largest cross-cultural survey in Europe conducted to date. It was conducted in 14 languages. The data collection was held between January and May 2022. It took place at 46 research performing organizations in 15 countries, and it yielded over 42,000 responses. So it's really a robust sample. So what did the survey show? Overall, nearly 2 in 3 respondents have experienced at least one form of gender-based violence, specifically 62%. And 1 in 3 indicated that they experienced sexual harassment specifically. When you look at the classification by gender, you can see that non-binary people and people identifying as other gender identity experienced significantly more violence than men, of course, but also women. And women tended to have more experience of violence than men of. Importantly, also, the survey yielded information about the perpetrators, and so in relation to all forms of violence, men predominate among perpetrators. When we look at the intersecting identities, you can see that the various groups have significantly higher incidence of violence than the group of women. So LGBT plus at 68%, disability and chronic illness people in this group indicated 72% prevalence, and ethnic minority groups 69%. So these are really important figures in terms of how much exposure to violence there is in academic settings in Europe. What was quite alarming is the very low rate of reporting of gender-based violence. So among students, only 7% of those that experienced any form of violence reported it. Among staff, it was 23%. So overall, on only 13% of people. What were the reasons for not reporting? So the most important, almost half of the people who have experience indicated that they were not sure whether the behavior was serious enough to report. And then almost a third did not recognize the behavior as violence at the time it happened. And 1/4 of people did not think that anything would happen. And so these are really serious indications of failures on the part of our institutions. The first point, it is not that people are stupid and do not know what is violence or not, but that the institutions do not indicate what is permitted and prohibited behavior to occur in educational and academic settings. There are very often no guidances on what is not permitted and what should not be happening. And we are discovering this also in a recent qualitative study that we conducted in GenderSAFE. We can discuss this later. The 1/4 of people who did not think that anything would happen is also a very important indication to institutions that they need to do better to ensure that people have trust that reporting will yield outcomes. Now, of course, gender-based violence then has important consequences on the people who experience such incidents. And so among staff, this leads to dissatisfaction with the job, reduced work productivity, people consider leaving academic sector, and they feel disengaged from colleagues. And similarly, among students, this is very sort of mirror image. They miss classes, they feel dissatisfied with the course of their studies, they experience reduced learning achievements, and feel disengaged from their fellow students. And so the impacts very clearly have negative consequences, not only on the well-being of the people themselves, and we have additional data about that from UniSAFE as well, but it has negative consequences on the institutions and their primary missions to educate and conduct superb, excellent research. Because if people do not feel safe, they clearly cannot perform to the best of their ability, which is something that the responses indicate. So in UniSAFE, we developed a theoretical and conceptual model of 7 Ps, which I would like to briefly introduce now. The model is a holistic framework for analyzing, assessing, and developing comprehensive policies. So it covers all the bases of what institutions should have in place to be positioned well to address forms of gender-based violence. And so here at the center, you can see prevalence. So this means that we need data to be able to know the scope, see where most attention needs to be put when designing policy. Then the requisite elements of the policy are to address prevention so that incidents do not occur, ensure protection of the potential victims, put in place measures to sanction, so prosecution, ensure that services are available, not only to victim survivors, but also the entire community. The policy can be developed and implemented in partnership with other relevant institutions. And then this all together constitutes the policy. And I will now go in a little in depth over the individual elements. So prevalence, as I said, refers to data and data collection to estimate the extent of gender-based violence for different groups of people, and ideally provide information on different forms of gender-based violence. And this can be done through surveys at the institutional level that can be organized periodically, but it should also relate to collecting data on incidents so that there is ongoing influx of information about what is happening on an annual basis in terms of cases reported and their outcomes. Prevention then refers to measures to promote changes in the social and cultural patterns of behavior and attitudes at the institutional level. It addresses the culture and values, and typically this is related, for example, to induction of students as well as staff, so induction training or courses, awareness-raising campaigns, training materials, etc., and training provision. This can also include active bystander training so that people are equipped to intervene when they witness an incident. Protection goes to ensuring the safety and meeting the needs of potential victims, survivors, and this includes procedures and infrastructures to receive complaints or receive reports in the initial stage, and then reports if it goes to this stage, and provide support to people so that they feel safe in the entire process of case handling. For prosecution, these are the disciplinary measures. It can cover legal proceedings against suspected perpetrators and the related investigative measures, as well as judicial procedures. But for the institutions, primarily, this means having definitions of sanctions for particular types of cases, and then the investigation procedure and disciplinary procedure. For provision of services, these are aimed to support not only victim survivors and their families, but also the offenders and bystanders in dealing with the cases. These can be psychological, medical, legal, and other forms of support. And then in terms of partnerships, this is very important. Universities and research institutions can act together with other actors such as government agencies and civil society organizations. So NGOs, for example, can provide the training. Other service providers. We have in Europe examples where, for example, medical teaching faculties provide medical services to their parent university. It also refers to trade unions and staff and student associations in the Czech Republic, for example, but also elsewhere in Europe, in France, Italy, as well as Ireland, for example. Student mobilizations have been very important to address gender-based violence in higher education institutions. And then finally, policies refer to the policy frameworks that provide the coherent set of measures with a clear vision and strategy that the institution wants to put forward to create safe working and study environment. And it is typically enshrined in a document that the institution adopts. We can see that there is a movement away from generic codes of conduct to specifically designed gender-based violence policies. You can find more about the 7P model and how to implement it in the UniSAFE toolkit. You have the link here. So there's a wealth of practical information in the toolkit for institutions, as well as the results of the survey. And I will now spend a little time taking us to the last stage of where we are now, implementing the Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct and what role the GenderSAFE project plays in this. So the Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct was drafted and adopted by the ERA Forum subgroup on inclusive gender equality last September. It was introduced at the R9 days in March in Brussels, and then we launched it at the ERA conference in September. The Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct revolves around three pillars of action: commitment, action, and accountability. And importantly, it is state-of-the-art. So the commitment revolves around the recognition of gender-based violence along the entire continuum, including microaggressions and, let's say, more and less serious forms of misconduct. They recognize the need to implement trauma-informed, victim-centered approaches in the policies. It recognizes the intersectional nature of violence and the fact that gender-based violence is embedded in power structures. The action pillar essentially revolves around the 7 Ps that I just presented. So ensuring that all the different actions that are important and necessary are covered. And then accountability clearly goes to the role of leadership in building safe environments and having monitoring and evaluation systems in place to ensure that we know whether policies work. The Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct is intended for the entire ecosystem. So not only research performing organizations, including higher education institutions, but also national authorities such as ministries, which are important in setting the entire framework for addressing the issue, but also research funding organizations and other actors. We spent a lot of time looking into the zero tolerance approach as a concept, because of course this is a concept that has a long and say very critical history. It dates back to criminological approaches, but over the years, through scientific evolution, discourse, and criticism of the concept, we have now arrived at a period when we have a working definition of zero tolerance that can work to ensure its compliance or being in line with the institutional change approach. So focusing on shifting cultures and institutional procedures to address the issue. And so the Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct revolves around 5 elements. First is clear messaging. So sending out very clear message that any form of gender-based violence is serious enough to be addressed. Nothing is too minute to just be passed over. Having a focus on strong deterrence. So again, this goes to the fact that all forms of abusive behavior will be taken seriously, will be addressed and thoroughly investigated with potential sanctions. The focus on institutional change, so the deterrence aspect, the clear messaging, as well as the focus on accountability, all are geared towards ensuring institutional changes in procedures and cultures of institutions. Clarity of intent, meaning that there are feasible goals defined for the institutions to eradicate gender-based violence, and then focus on rehabilitation and institutional healing. This is something that is typically not addressed sufficiently. Either the cases are glossed over and there's no support for the person who is experiencing forms of violence, or if things happen, there's investigation. Very often we underestimate the need for closure and institutional healing. So institutions are very often left in complete disarray, where people side one of the parties, one or the other party, and there's a lot of bad blood, bad feelings. So the institutions really need to pay attention also to the healing process afterwards. So how does this relate to the GenderSAFE project? And this is really the last bit of what I will be talking about. GenderSAFE is Horizon Europe project that is in its second year of implementation. We will run until February 2027. There are 6 partners in the consortium: European Science Foundation, Gothenburg University, Knowledge and Innovation in Italy, our Institute of Sociology, Yellow Window in Belgium, and Central European University in Budapest. And our mission is to support research in higher education institutions in establishing safe, inclusive, and respectful environments by setting up comprehensive policies. And so what does this mean in practice? So we're focused on strengthening the zero tolerance policies at the institutional level by developing a model policy framework that reflects the focus on power dynamics, intersectionality, mobility, and precarity, and revolves around the 7P model. We now have draft of the model policy framework ready, and we are going forward to testing the model starting in May this year. We also encourage the adoption of the zero tolerance policies through mutual learning, co-design, and testing of the model policy framework in our community of practice. The community is constituted. We have at this stage 6 circles within the community, one of which brings together students, one institutions from Central and Eastern European countries, another focuses on intersectionality. We have a legal circle because the legal issues are really important, and we have very disparate legal situation across the EU. So a lot of the issues need to be hashed out by lawyers. And then we also have a circle for national authorities, which can support the actions at the institutional level. We're also developing institutional capacities through trainings. All these trainings are recorded and also available on our website, and they are for further use by institutions. And we're also creating a knowledge base by developing data collection and monitoring system. So at this stage, we have a first draft of national policy monitoring methodology, which we tested with representatives of national authorities, and it will be further developed and should be launched in the fall with data collection among national ministries and responsible state administration. We will also have a methodology for data collection at the institutional level, which will be, of course, widely disseminated. This will be done, both of these methodologies will be online, and institutions that complete the survey or data collection will then receive their own report. And once we have enough responsives in the system, we will be also able to benchmark different clusters of institutions. And so this gets me to the end. You can subscribe to GenderSAFE newsletter to follow us further. You can also pledge support to the Zero Tolerance Code of Conduct and the actions that are outlined there. And you can follow us on social media. And with this, I will thank you and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcela. That was really fantastic. It was a great overview. So thank you so much. And also, it was super interesting to hear also from your work, which is super important. And I have already some questions, but I will open now immediately the floor for discussion. So you're welcome to either raise your hand or write in the chat. So please, if anyone has wants to start. Oh, thank you. So in the meantime, I would like maybe to ask a quick question regarding data collection, which was impressive with your project. So congratulations, first of all, for accomplishing that, because I can imagine it was not an easy task. And I'd like to ask especially, what were the challenges in data collection? Because I can imagine it was not easy also to draft the survey, first of all, because you were building more or less from the scratch, because there are not so many data already available, and also which challenges you met while collecting the data. I mean, how was the response? Was it easy to find people, or there were some challenges also in that regard? Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very important question, Federica. Yes, indeed, a lot of challenges. The questionnaire itself was developed within a work package led by GESIS in UniSAFE and with the lead of Dr. Anke Lipinski, together with colleagues from University of Gothenburg. And it built on existing surveys into gender-based violence. The batteries of questions that we used some of them were already previously tested and validated, and this primarily pertains to the batteries of questions related to sexual violence, gender harassment, sexual harassment, etc. But for example, for psychological violence, colleagues were developing new questions. And so the survey also served to validate that battery of questions. So there was also a lot of innovative work going into this. So that, of course, took some time. And then we worked with national experts in the 15 countries to translate the questionnaire into the national languages. And each of the countries, 15 countries where it was organized, it was conducted both in the national language, which of course the translation had to be validated and cross-translated. So all that was taking place as well as English. So we captured both. And then we recruited institutions through a memorandum of understanding to participate in the study. And so the top management had to commit to conducting this study. The institutions were also listed on the UniSAFE website. And so we had a contact person in the institutions to support the data collection. You could see that it took place over a fairly long period of time from January to May. This included several rounds of reminder sending. Of course, the response rate was all over the place. I would say in some instances it was really, really small. In other institutions, we managed to have a very good proportion of responses. This also depended on the size of the institution. We can see that smaller institutions, it is easier, let's say, to mobilize people. But overall, the 42,000 responses was a satisfactory outcome for us, and at the aggregate, it gives us an important picture of what people are facing in the European research area.
Thank you so much. That was really an impressive work. And I see one question in the chat. Thank you so much. Did the survey delivered in participant partner university only, or other institutions also involved during the process?
So the institutions received the data set. They did not receive an analysis of the data, but they received the data set for their own work. In the Czech Republic, we, for example, collaborated with 2 of the participating institutions from the Center for Gender and Science to support their data analysis and interpretation. And yes, the data collection was, I should have said, supported by an external supplier. So there was a tender for external supplier to actually run the survey.
Thank you. And any other questions? Chat? So, maybe also something that you were mentioning that was super interesting, the institutional healing process, which is true something that is not so easily overlooked. I was wondering, are there already some practices on this at the institutional level? Have you found something already, or is really, very randomly taken into account?
So a lot of the things that are in the model policy framework were identified as necessary steps that are currently underdeveloped in the institutional policies. Following the survey, and also in UniSAFE, apart from the survey, we also conducted case studies at institutions and interviews with victims, survivors. And so this additional data really showed the multiple ways that institutions fail in supporting victims, survivors, and dealing with cases. And this goes both to institutions that have a policy, that have a protocol, where you even have a national policy. So this is, for example, France and Spain. But it was equally true, not surprisingly, in institutions where you do not have any institutional policy, and this is not supported by the ministry, for example. And so the experience of people trying to navigate reporting was very serious, and we do have some indications of positive measures or positive examples, but not many. And for the healing and restoration, restorative justice, this is even less addressed. And so following all these research phases in UniSAFE, we conducted a series of workshops with people responsible for implementing policies to identify their needs. And so these needs are what we are now reflecting in the model policy framework. And that's why we will be running the testing now in GenderSAFE to really see with the institutions what they are doing on the ground and how we can support them, because really there is so little. And for example, Ireland is one of the countries that has the most advanced policy framework in Europe, with paying attention to also intersectional inequality and intersectional attention to gender-based violence. Ireland is now moving towards thinking how to ensure that the policy implementation is trauma-informed, victim-centered. And this is something that we really do not have a qualitative study among victim survivors, where really multiple ways of institutional failure, or what Jennifer Freight calls institutional betrayal. And so we really need to focus on how ensuring that institutions take responsibility for handling cases rather than betraying their staff and students.
Thank you so much. That is very interesting. It's also another question. Thank you so much. I'd like to ask about the general approach of university in the Czech Republic to this issue. If there are any that are open to this, or how do you think this can be changed?
Thank you very much. So in the Czech Republic, I think we see really positive evolution over the course of the last 3 years. I think that this is related partially to the outbreak of cases that we saw in 2022, 2023, when we had really many cases in the media where students tried to address issues with institutional leadership unsuccessfully. And so as a last resort, this got reported, and then the institutions were really pushed to act. What we can see is the institution of ombudspersons across universities in the Czech Republic, who then formed the School Ombuds platform. And I think that this is really an amazing initiative. It brings together the ombuds from higher education institutions for mutual learning, exchange, to develop procedures together, learn from one another, support each other. So this is really great. And in the Center for Gender and Science, we also analyze on an annual basis annual reports from higher education institutions to the Ministry of Education. And there is one element where higher education institutions must report on HR issues, but also on gender equality plans and actions taken to address gender-based violence. And so we analyze this for the ministry, and we can see, I mean, this was instituted in 2017, and we can see a steady increase in measures that institutions are adopting. And really, they are moving away from having codes of conduct, which was the typical way to address this, that they had one sentence in their code of conduct, to having the ombudsperson and also a policy, having a reporting process in place. Some are running information awareness raising campaigns. So I think that we are on good track, but of course, academia is embedded in power dynamics. It is a very masculine organization still. So there are challenges and sometimes, of course, very strong resistances. We conducted a small-scale study among the ombuds people, And we can see that the institutions really are not providing the necessary resources. And so I would say that the analyses that we have allow now the ombudspeople or the responsible staff to handle cases as they come, but they have very limited resources to do preventative work or to focus on more procedural work, so setting the procedures in place. And so it's more reactive rather than proactive, because they just do not have the time and money to do this. So I think the institutional leadership really needs to do better here.
Thank you so much. Any other question so far? I think this was so the last question closes very well, wrap-ups very well also this webinar that was really amazing. So thank you so much also, Marcella, for staying with us today for this super interesting presentation, the discussion. Thanks a lot to all our participants, also for the comments, questions, to the research team, also the World Trade Institute, our co-organizer of this agenda lecture series. And thank you so much for the conference service at the Institute of International Relations, to Anastasia, Van and Joanna for making this event possible, and also to Barbara Lukashova, a researcher in the HR Just project, for the support. And I invite all of you to stay tuned for the next webinars in the Agenda Lecture series. We will continue now on the 30th of April and with another presentation on CEDAW and the groundbreaking General Recommendation number 40 with Dr. Celine Georgi, UN officer at the CEDAW committee. So you can explore the full program also on our websites. So stay tuned, take good care, and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.